everyone, my name is Zeke Ziesman and we are halfway through the year, so you know what that means. It's time for me to update my 2023 movie ranking. And yeah, I know I'm a little late on this, but if you follow my Twitter, you'll know that this is my second attempt at making this video since the first time I was trying out a new mic and it ended up sounding like shit.
So unless you want a whole video sounding like this, you're welcome.
Anyways, enough talking, let's get straight into this ranking. At number 25, we have 65, which I gave a 3 out of 10. Now, for the movies we already went over in the last part, I'm gonna keep it short, which is gonna be most of the first half of this video. This was a good few months for movies. But when it comes to 65, I just couldn't get into this movie. I thought the third act was cool and there were a few fun moments leading up to it, but everything else was surprisingly boring for a dinosaur movie. At number 24, I have You People, which I gave a 3 out of 10. You'd expect a movie starring Jonah Hill and Eddie Murphy in the leads to be, funny, right? But instead, you're just left with this feeling of awkwardness for almost 2 hours. And I know comedy is subjective, so some people might find this movie hilarious, but I think it got maybe like one chuckle out of me and that was it. Jonah Hill feels strangely miscast considering he's one of the writers for this movie. And this movie also has one of my biggest Hollywood pet peeves, and it's when filmmakers just don't trust the audience to pick up on the themes of the movie. There are times where it feels like the characters are just straight up shouting at the audience, "Hey, these are the themes of the movie in case you forgot the last time we told you 5 minutes ago." So yeah, I would actually like to see these two in a movie again because they do have good chemistry, just a better movie next time. At number 23, I have Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania at a 4 out of 10. Now I have a full review for this one on the channel if you want to go check that out, so I'm going to keep it extra short here. Everything in this movie, from the characters to the story to even technical stuff like the CGI and cinematography, felt so underdeveloped. I don't know what would have helped, a few months delay, maybe a few more drafts on the script, but as a start to phase 5 and this whole Kang storyline, this was just not it. At number 22, I have The Pale Blue Eye, which I gave a 5 out of 10. This one's tough for me because there's quite a few things I liked about this movie. I love the atmosphere, I like the cinematography, and you guys know I'm a huge Christian Bale fanboy. But when it comes to the actual mystery at the center of this movie, I just couldn't get invested. There's barely any clues for the audience to follow, and the resolution of it is so out of nowhere, it's impossible for the audience to possibly guess. So while I love the technical aspects of this movie, the actual story and mystery behind it just isn't very engaging as a viewer. At number 21, I have Shazam! Fury of the Gods at a 5 out of 10. I mean, what can I really say? This is your basic cookie-cutter superhero movie that we get way too many of nowadays. And yeah, there's things I liked. I think Zachary Levi is still a great choice for the role of Shazam. And I thought this movie was actually pretty funny. A lot of the jokes had me laughing. But with a weak story, lots of tonal inconsistency, and just a lack of the charm that made the first one so special, I just couldn't get behind this one. At number 20, I have Megan, which I gave a 6 out of 10. Probably one of my hottest takes on this list, since I know there's a lot of people that loved this movie, but personally, I thought it was just okay. The first half is surprisingly bleak since it focuses so much on this little girl mourning the death of her parents. Which I guess isn't a flaw with the movie itself, but the way it was marketed, it's just not what you see this kind of movie for. However, when Megan finally snaps in that second half and starts killing people, that's when it gets really fun. Megan doesn't immediately rank as one of my favorite slasher villains of the 21st century like some people, but hey, she has a sequel coming out and I did like her as a villain in this movie, so we'll see. At number 19, I have Mean-Spirited, which I gave a 7 out of 10. Listen, if you want a fun horror comedy to watch with your friends one night, this is it. The whole thing is shot like a YouTube vlog, and I thought that would get really exhausting really fast, but it actually added to my enjoyment of the movie and led to some of the funniest scenes. Now, the characters aren't the greatest, most of them feel very one note, but again, if all you're looking for is a good horror comedy to pass the time, Mean-Spirited's got you. At number 18, I have A Man Called Otto, which I gave a 7 out of 10. You don't see Tom Hanks in this type of role very often, but he actually does a really good job and I found myself getting really invested in his character. What I couldn't get invested in though was the duo that forms in this movie between him and this woman that moves in across the street. I just don't buy that Otto would share his deepest, darkest secrets with this woman because they hung out every once in a while and he was miserable every single time. Still, this movie is incredibly heartfelt and one of the biggest surprises for me this year, so I can't help but to give it a positive score. At number 17, I have Knock at the Cabin, which I also gave a 7 out of 10. Look, M. Night Shyamalan will make some of the best and some of the worst movies you'll ever see. But when it comes to Knock at the Cabin, I feel it leans towards the good side of the Shyamalan spectrum. Now, I do have some problems with this movie, such as my pet peeve that I talked about earlier. This movie has a lot of hand-holding when it comes to things that the audience very well could have figured out on their own. This movie also has way too many flashbacks in my opinion, since a lot of them don't even really contribute towards the plot. Still, with the tense atmosphere and great performances all around, especially from Dave Bautista, Knock at the Cabin is a really good thriller. At number 16, we have Transformers: Rise of the Beasts at a 7 out of 10. Longtime viewers of my TikTok account know that I'm not the biggest fan of the Michael Bay Transformers movies. Trust me, you guys let me know how much of an unpopular opinion that was. But what I am a fan of when it comes to Transformers is the cartoons, which this movie pulls a lot from, so I'm bound to like it. I will say this movie starts to drag a lot in the second act, and there is a ton of plot convenience for the main characters throughout the entire thing. But with a great first act and an epic third act, this movie ranks among my favorite of the Transformers franchise. At number 15, I have Cocaine Bear, which I gave a 7 out of 10. Yeah, I know this contradicts... Oh my god, hi. Yeah, I know this contradicts my last video, but you know what? Opinions change, recency bias happens. It probably won't be the last time. Listen, if you want to see a bear do cocaine and fuck people up, this is the movie for you. I will say though, make sure you watch it with a group. I watched this with a packed theater, and it's one of the best theater experiences I've ever had. Although if you're watching this by yourself, I can see why you'd get bored with the many plot lines going on at once, some way more interesting than others. Still, this movie is a gory and disgusting blast. At number 14, I have Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, which I gave another 7 out of 10. Let me preface this by saying I have never played a game of Dungeons & Dragons in my life. I don't even know how that shit works. I just went into this movie wanting a fun fantasy adventure, and that is exactly what I got. The action is amazing, the charisma between the entire cast is off the charts, and this movie is actually hilarious. I mean, this is exactly my sense of humor. I will say a lot of the characters, especially the villains, feel very one note. But if you just want a fun fantasy adventure, you can't go wrong with this. At number 13, I have Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny with a 7 out of 10. Look, if this was like 30 minutes shorter, it could have been up there with the original trilogy for me. The slow pacing does come with Mangold's directing, and while yeah, he does a great job in this movie, Spielberg's absence is definitely felt. What Mangold brings to the table in this franchise is his experience from Logan telling stories about aging heroes trying to find their place in the world. And that works great for Indiana Jones. He also brings a distinct visual style to this franchise. I mean, the first 20 minutes alone are amazing. I can see Helena being a hit or miss for a lot of people. Personally, I didn't mind her, but I can see why others would find her annoying. Still, Dial of Destiny is a good enough send-off for a childhood hero. At number 12, I have Missing, which I gave an 8 out of 10. This is another one where I thought the format of the movie would get really old really fast, but it actually made the movie a lot more fun. The mystery at the center of this movie is also a lot more fun than something like The Pale Blue Eye, because there's a lot of clues for the audience to pick up on and play along with. This is another one like Dial of Destiny where I think it goes on for a bit too long. Still, it's a decent enough horror mystery that it finds its way to the top half of this list. At number 11, I have the Super Mario Bros. Movie at an 8 out of 10. Definitely the biggest surprise of the year for me. We all know where we were when Chris Pratt was announced to be in the Illumination Mario movie, and we all thought it was going to be hot garbage. But he and the other cast members actually do a pretty good job here. Especially Charlie Day as Luigi and Jack Black as Bowser, who steal the show when it comes to voice acting. The story does move at a breakneck pace and even feels really rushed at times. But if you grew up with the Mario games like I did, you'll find a lot to love in this movie. Bringing us into our top 10 is Extraction 2 with an 8 out of 10. I thought the first Extraction movie was generic, but still fun. And then this movie comes around and actually fixed a lot of the problems I had with that first movie. The villain is definitely a lot more intimidating this time around, and I like a lot of the deep dives into Tyler Rake's backstory. He's not just this big, tough action dude, he feels like an actual character. And don't even get me started on the action in this movie. That 20-minute wonder was fucking awesome. The side characters in this movie do feel a little underdeveloped, and the chemistry isn't all there. There's also this one kid who's kind of like Spider from Avatar: The Way of Water in the sense that his motives are all over the fucking place. But in all honesty, if the John Wick team decides to stop at Chapter 4, hopefully, I can see Extraction taking its place as the next big action franchise. At number 9, I have Air, which I gave an 8 out of 10. Anyone who knows me knows I don't know jack shit about basketball, so a lot of that stuff just flew right over my head. But you know, I like Ben Affleck as a director, and I like whenever he pairs up with Matt Damon. I feel like the two are always doing something great together. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of never showing Michael Jordan in this movie. I understand why they did it, but at the same time, there's a scene in this movie where Matt Damon is giving this big speech to Michael Jordan, but when he might as well be giving it to a cardboard cutout, it just lessens the impact. Even though I can name like 10 basketball players and that's it, I thought Air was still a really entertaining time. At number 8, I have The Flash, which I gave an 8 out of 10. Another hot take, but in the opposite effect this time, since there's a lot of people that hate this movie, but personally, I didn't mind it. Ezra Miller, while I'm not going to talk about him as a person right now, I thought he did good in the movie. I also think this is Michael Keaton's best performance as Batman. Fight me, I will die on this hill. I think Sasha Calle is also great as Supergirl, and I wouldn't mind seeing her star as the lead role in Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow in the new DCU. Probably my biggest complaint with this movie is the CGI, which normally I wouldn't care, but it gets so bad at points in this movie, I just couldn't ignore it. Also, if you happen to know what my least favorite movie of all time is, you'll know why I wasn't a huge fan of the ending of this movie. But with that stuff aside, I thought this was a fun yet flawed conclusion to the DCEU. At number 7, I have Scream 6, which I gave a 9 out of 10. You guys know I'm a huge fan of the Scream franchise, so believe me when I say this is the best one since the original. Ghostface is the most ruthless he's ever been, the New York setting is a breath of fresh air for the series, and I'm actually digging the core 4 as the new main characters of this franchise. I'm not the biggest fan of the killer's motive in this movie since it's the exact same as a previous Ghostface. Still, I would say this is the best horror movie of the year so far, if it weren't for this next one. Because at number 6, I have Evil Dead Rise, which I gave a 9 out of 10. I just recently got into the Evil Dead franchise like a month ago, but after watching all those movies, this is my favorite out of them. Although the TV show is still the best piece of Evil Dead media, fight me on that. Yeah, sure, it doesn't have Ash, but I think Beth is still a really cool final girl and a nice addition to this franchise. I also think they were able to find a nice blend between Sam Raimi's goofiness and Fede Alvarez's gruesomeness. So at least for now, Evil Dead Rise is currently my favorite horror movie of the year so far. At number 5, I have Tetris, which I'm giving a 9 out of 10. Who knew watching people fight for the rights of a video game could be this entertaining? Taron Egerton is perfectly cast as Hank Rogers, and the actor who plays Alexei, I'm so sorry I can't remember his name right now, he also does great, and the chemistry those two have together on screen is amazing. Now, there are some scenes that are obviously made up for the movie, but they're just so fun and somehow fit so naturally into this story that you just don't really care. So if you're looking for A, a movie about the history of Tetris, or B, a Cold War thriller, this is the one for you. At number 4, I have Creed 3, which I am giving a 9 out of 10. Listen, if you ask me, the Creed trilogy has yet to miss, even with this being Michael B. Jordan's directorial debut. He brings so much energy and style into this franchise that I can't wait to see him direct again in the future. Jonathan Majors, while again we're not going to get into him as a person right now, plays one of the franchise's best villains. I also like that this movie justifies the passing of the torch in Creed 2 from Rocky to Adonis by having Adonis carry this movie on his own. Michael B. Jordan does a great job in front of and behind the camera, and if they make a Creed 4, I need him to direct that one too. At number 3, I have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which I gave a 10 out of 10. This is my new favorite MCU project. Out of all the movies and shows, this is the one. I love how they were able to keep that charm and silliness that made the first two so special, while still being able to tackle these serious themes of animal cruelty. Those themes, as well as Rocket's backstory that gets explored in this movie, shot him up to one of my favorite MCU characters. The soundtrack is amazing once again, the action is top tier, and the villain is one of the most hateable in the MCU. I mean, you just want to see this guy die immediately. So while I'm sad we won't be getting any more Guardians of the Galaxy, at least not with this team, I still think this is a great conclusion to their story. At number 2, we have John Wick Chapter 4 sitting at a 10 out of 10. I know I mentioned earlier that I hope they don't make any more John Wick movies after this, but that's just because this is such a great ending to the franchise. Nearly 3 hours of endless, amazing action set pieces, just one after the other, along with some of the best cinematography in the entire series. The villains as well are awesome. Bill Skarsgård plays the best villain in the whole franchise, and Kane is a nice rival turned partner for John Wick. So while I do hope they don't milk this franchise and they just end it here, I cannot wait to see what Chad Stahelski does after this. And at number 1, we have Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse at a 10 out of 10. Do I even need to say why this movie is awesome? This is one of the best looking movies I've ever seen. I mean, every single frame of this movie feels like a painting that you could hang up on your wall. And I think we just need to applaud the animators, because apparently Spider-Punk alone took 3 years to animate. How the hell do you do that? And it helps that the story is just as great. I've heard a few people being like, oh, it's just a bunch of Spider-Man cameos. Yeah, for like one scene. Because at the center of all this is a great story about Miles Morales trying to find his own identity, not just as Spider-Man, but as a person, something I'm sure a lot of us can relate to. And that cliffhanger, dude, I need to see Beyond the Spider-Verse immediately after that. And I don't actually mean that, by the way. Animators, take your time to make the movie perfect. I can wait. I could go on and on about this movie for days, but all I'm gonna say right now is that this is gonna be a really hard one to top for this year. Maybe. And that is my Q2 2023 movie ranking. I'm not going to make any false promises this time and say there will be more frequent YouTube videos because I'm more free, because every time I say that, something comes up and I have no time to make YouTube videos. These take a while, alright? Give me a break. Like a 3-month one. Nah, but in all seriousness, if that happens, go follow me on other social media, because if I'm not on here, I'm probably on one of those. So until next time, this is Zeke Ziesman signing off.